Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Bruchim Abayim. So anyway, our friend Sam here is asking, is there a difference in the perception of God according to the Rambam and according to Kabbalah? And he suggests the following. The Rambam takes the Aristotelian view that God exists and cares for the world and revealed himself but isn't directly involved, while Kabbalah takes the view of Tzimtzum. Well, if that's it's an interesting question, right? And this proposal is one view, and I guess there could also be the Hasidic view of Tzimtzum Lav Kapshuto. So for those who don't know what Tzimtzum means, that in order for the world to exist and for human beings to have free will, God had to withdraw himself, so to speak, in order to create an empty space in which the world could exist, because if God's presence was so obvious, there would be no room for us to have free will, because we would see God right in front of us. And so God had to withdraw himself in order to create the space for this world to exist. And that seems to be the view of the Vilna Gaon. The Hasidic view, though, is Tzimtzum Lav Kapshuto, that this term of Tzimtzum is not to be understood as it is explained in its simple meaning, but rather that it's, in actuality, God could not withdraw himself because of his infinite nature. And so it's impossible for there to be a place that's actually empty of God, but it's an illusion of Tzimtzum, as opposed to an actual Tzimtzum. It's an illusion that God drew himself in, hid himself behind the world, but he's actually fully everywhere in his essence of the Ein Sof, of the infinite nature of God, must be in all places at all times throughout, and there cannot be any place empty of him. And it's only in his revealed nature that there appears to be this hidden aspect, that God appears to be concealed, but it's an illusion. And that is what creates the possibility of free will, this illusion that God has withdrawn himself. Now, the idea of Tzimtzum is not necessarily a contradiction to the Aristotelian view that we are attributing to the Rambam, which is not very clear that the Rambam held that in absolute, but rather used the obvious ideology of Aristotle and Plato and Socrates, in the sense that whatever has a very clear logical argument must be accepted because logic dictates it as such. And so that's where the Aristotelian philosophy comes into the Maimonidean theology, where it is necessary to do so, because otherwise it just doesn't fit otherwise. However, this question of God's direct involvement in the world certainly is different. If one would say, and it's not clear that that's exactly what the Rambam is saying, because the Rambam has different views that he expresses in different works. But nonetheless, a lot of the Hasidic masters have said to avoid the Rambam's philosophical treatises because they run in contradiction to simple faith. And the Hasidic appeal to simple faith, particularly the Breslover approach, Rabbi Nachman's approach, is to avoid, not even to touch any non-legal works of the Rambam. And even to the point of saying that even Hilchos Yesodei Torah is a non-legal work, while it's all legal, like mamish right in front of me. Oh my goodness, it's almost like gonna touch my car, this bald eagle. That was quite a sight. My wife said there should be a special bracha when you see a bald eagle. It's such an amazing thing to see. And it's behind me. I can see it now. You can't see it in the camera. Anyway, it's funny because the Rambam was called the Nesher. He was called the eagle of the synagogue, right? So the Nesher Hagadol. So there's some divine providence in seeing an eagle while we're talking about Maimonides. So it's not clear that that's exactly the Maimonidean view. It could be expressed in different ways, again, in his different works. But it's interesting how some Breslover Hasidim that I know will say even Hilchos Yesodei Torah, which is presented as a halachic work, is not a halachic work, but rather a philosophical work, and therefore is eschewed in the Breslover community. I don't believe in censorship. That's one reason why I'm not a square chassid. I can't live in a world where the Ramchal is verboten. Among the Satmar Chassidim, there's no one who would say you can't read Rav Kook's writings. It's just we take it with a grain of sand, but we should understand where he's coming from, what he was dealing with, and why we reject it. Not say don't read it. The Samarov learned the Ema Banim Smecha. He spent a Shabbos in Debrecen, and he found the Sefer Ema Banim Smecha, and he didn't go to sleep until he refuted all the arguments in the Ema Banim Smecha. He didn't say, "Oh, it's Tameh, you can't learn it." No, he said he wants to understand why he wants to get a different perspective to strengthen his own view and understand why he believes what he believes and why he opposes the theories that are presented there. And he saw that as a worthwhile endeavor. And so the same thing, the Breslovers will say you can't learn the Mar Nevuchim, you can't learn the Guide to the Perplexed, you can't even learn the Hilchos Yesodei Torah. It's I love Rabbi Nachman. It's like a lot of people say. Everyone should say when you get to heaven, "Oh, I have more than one rabbi. I have 2 rabbis, 3 rabbis," and one of them has to be Rabbi Nachman. We all have to be Hasidim of Rabbi Nachman. But Sof Kol Sof, I find that an untenable approach, particularly because Rabbi Nachman encouraged people to learn everything, to read everything, and so it almost contradicts his own approach. But perhaps at the very least we learn it, al derech amira ba'alma. We daven through it. It's a recitation, it's a devotion, and doesn't necessarily require our mental concentration. In the same way, that's how my ancestor, the Chavos Yorer, said that's how we should learn Kabbalah. That it's supposed to be a recitation that is a devotional recitation of whatever, the Zohar or whatever else, as opposed to when people would ask him questions of what does this mean, what does that mean, he said, I don't know what it means, but I'm not saying it's not holy. I'm just saying we should read it just as a devotional reading, and that's it. And it's a tradition that we have, but you get out of it what you get out of it, and if you have a question, don't expect an answer, maybe. And in a certain sense, that's really how we're supposed to understand it, because it's supposed to be an emotional pursuit by reading the Sifrei Kabbalah. So and so perhaps we could read the Mar Nevuchim in the same way. I don't know, as a devotional reading, as opposed to as a intellectual ones, which is obviously not what the Rambam would have wanted, right? But maybe that is a way that we can do things, right? So in any event, I'll point to the Tanya. That's one thing I know of, and I'm sure the other Sfarim and Kedoshim have the same view. But if you notice, whenever the Tanya would quote the Rambam for some theological issue, and a lot of people know the Tanya, right? Because the Lubavitchers, they pushed it a lot. So when I was a kid, even though I was never a Lubavitcher Chassid, but like I used to do the chitas. I used to learn the daily Tanya every day. So I haven't done it in a few years now, but I used to have an app that held it up, and so that's why I kept doing it for a while, and then now I'm not as connected to it as I used to be, but I remember a lot of it, and part of it is that the Rambam, every time the Tanya quotes the Rambam, he says something along those lines, that the Kabbalists agree, whatever, however they want to approach it, but that the Kabbalists agree here with Maimonides, and so there are places where they agree, and there are places where it would seem, therefore, if there are places that it has to be noted that they agree, obviously there are places where they disagree. And generally, the Rambam is understood to be the basic theology, meaning, there's a limit to our orthodoxy, there's a limit to what is required doctrinally from a Jew, and it's basically the Rambam, meaning if it's not one of the Yud Gimel Ikrim, if it's not one of the 13 principles of faith, which my Rebbe and Rabbi Belinsky, Zechron Levrach, others said you could use the term dogma to refer to them, right? And the arguments between Maimonides and the other Rishonim and some of the Achronim about these issues was not whether or not these are appropriate beliefs, but whether or not they are dogmatic beliefs. And so when the Raavad said that there were people greater than the Rambam who believed in the corporeal nature of the Almighty, he wasn't saying that he himself believes it. But what he's saying is that it's not a dogmatic issue. And to limit the dogmatic, the limits of our orthodoxy, like Professor Shapiro wrote the book about, Rabbi Dr. Shapiro wrote a book about the limits of Orthodox theology. I've never read the whole sefer there. But anyway, talking about legal stuff there, if anybody's wondering. But the point that I'm bringing out is, okay, there's nobody's arguing that most Jews believe that God is incorporeal, to the point where when we have this aberration that there's a sefer called the Shir Koma, which seems to be addressing, God's body, the measurements of God's body. There are generally different approaches to it, to the point where the Rambam assumes it to be a forgery, and the other Rishonim would say, well, it's talking about the Shechina, it's talking about the Kavod, it's talking about something other than God's essence, and so forth. These other various approaches that we have in these forums. So the point that I wanted to bring out with all of this is that there are differing views in the theology of Maimonides and the various Kabbalists, as there are different views among the various Kabbalists. But none of them cross the line of heresy.
1 6
All right.
0 9
I think
9
I can pause this,
3
right? How do I
3
pause
5
this while?
1
All right. My wife was calling, that's why I hung up. That's why I stopped recording. The sun is. Anyway, we were saying, basically the point that I'm saying is that, these different aspects of theology, none of them violate the basic dogmas of Judaism, meaning either one would be a kosher approach within the realm of Judaism, as far as the way we accept these things. So the issue would come down to, all right, there are these differences, but also we are approaching the infinite God that we don't understand. So we understand to the best of our ability, according to the traditions that we've received, according to the revelations that God gave us. But in any event, we don't really have a clear answer of what these things mean. So therefore, it's essentially a moot point, because as long as it's within these general realms, we believe God is one, we believe, the questions as to whether or not there are these issues of divine providence are moot. But more than that, they really are identical. Meaning, if you think of it in a philosophical way, I'll tell you like this. There's a video online where Gerald Schroeder, who's a Frumiid, right? And he's a professor at MIT. Gerald Schroeder. So Schroeder, he says that basically science has discovered the proof of God's existence, and also he said the only thing that would be missing from the model that he is proposing is this question of divine providence, of meaning, again, the Aristotelian view is essentially proven. The question only comes to divine providence, and the answer that he has to the question of divine providence, he said that by virtue of the fact that you're watching this video right now, proves that divine providence is real. And that's all. He didn't elaborate on that. And essentially, meaning that the same creator put into work what eventually would come out to be this that we understand. And another way, I was listening to a comedian, but the late, great Norm Macdonald, he was arguing with, I believe it was Christopher Hitchens, it was some famous atheist, and he said, by virtue of the fact that we have that we have self-awareness, that we are sentient beings, demonstrates the existence of sentience within the world. And so therefore, these questions of divine providence only come down to questions of free will, because the providence itself is self-evident. That's where really these questions come in. You'll have to excuse the clicking noise. Let's get this back here. Sorry about that. Meaning by virtue of the fact that we are here. It's a demonstration of the truth of divine providence. So that's essentially really where this question comes down to. But then the question that comes out of this question of divine providence is, where is there room for free will? And so therefore, this question of tzimtzum, and is free will an illusion, and these types of questions, which all the philosophers and theologians, I was going to say theologists, that's not a word, the philosophers and theologians of all the various traditions have grappled with this question of divine providence versus free will, predestination versus free will. So, where do we find that balance? How do we fix that between these two different questions? It's a good question. We don't really know, but these questions don't present two different gods. There's one God. This is why we say the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, not as some have suggested that those three archetypical patriarchs had three different gods. No, God forbid, of course not. But rather that these three men understood God in a way that we don't understand God. And so when we refer to God as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, we're saying we are mefarlosich of zai. We are, I don't, how do you say that in English? Mefarlosich. We're leaving it over. We're relying on their theology for something that we don't understand, and maybe they themselves obviously did not understand perfectly. No one, not even the angels, can perfectly understand. But their understanding, or the understanding that Moses had, and Moses also referred to them, though, as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, by virtue of that reliance on their theology is what gives us the capability to say, okay, we are relying on that theology. We might not understand it. And so whether it's the Rambam or it's the Ariya Kodesh, they both said Elokei Avram, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov. And so therefore we are all verlassen sich auf jenem. We're all relying on that theology that we might not understand in order to say that this is the theology that exists, and we can discuss the details within what we have without really having the full understanding, because it's impossible to have that full understanding, because God is infinite and we are finite, and so therefore our understanding must be limited. But we do the best with that which was revealed to us, both through divine revelation, through prophecy, and also through wisdom, through philosophy. Both are informants of truth that we can grasp and use in this matter. And so that's really, whether or not there's a difference in the perception, it doesn't really matter. All right, thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment, and we will see you all later.